Welcome to the Busy Latter-day Saint, where righteous desires and living life come together. Here, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints discuss their challenges and successes in studying the Scriptures, and where listeners can come to learn more about studying the Scriptures. I'm your host, Richard Bernard. The music for this program is by Marvin Goldstein and used with his permission. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I encourage you to comment on this episode or the podcast in general. To leave a comment, click on the link in the show notes. I encourage you to subscribe to the podcast to be informed when a new episode has been posted. You subscribe by tapping on the subscribe or follow button. Each podcast app is different, so if you don't see the follow or subscribe button, a simple Google search about that app you're using will show you how. If you enjoy this podcast and have benefited from it, I encourage you to start donating a few dollars to the General Missionary Fund each month. As a side note, I have now joined the big guys by offering chapters for the podcast. This will make it easy for you to return to the podcast and hear again the sections that were of interest to you. Our guest today is George Durrant, a teacher, author, and generally a pleasant man. That last adjective phrase was expressed by George as he described his daily goal. As we get older, aches and pains start creeping in, which brings a cranky temperament. But George refuses to give in to such tendencies. I can testify that he was a pleasant man and much, much more. It was a delight spending time with George in his home. Durrant, in his early 90s, expressed that no one wants to hear from the aged, but I disagree. I enjoyed every minute with him and came away a richer man than when I arrived. It was humbling to be in his presence, and after this podcast, I'm sure you'll discover the same as you hear of his experiences and enjoy his wonderful sense of humor. By the way, if you'd like to hear more from George, in the show notes is a link to a talk he gave at BYU in 1976, titled The Number One Christian. And now, here's George. George, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
On the way here, it started to snow. I was surprised. I didn't think we were going to get any snow today.
Seems like we get snow almost every day.
Yes, I think we've been blessed. I keep praying for snow and rain because of our drought here, and
yes,
the Lord's blessing us.
And we look at that beautiful mountain and know that there's a lot of snow up there.
Yes, yeah, there is. Now, I live in American Fork, and you were born and raised in American Fork. I'm curious, obviously American Fork has changed a lot.
Oh, yeah.
But where in that area of American Fork were you raised?
In the olden days, there was a road that went from American Fork to Alpine, and it was called the Alpine Road. They've since built another road that everybody uses to get to Alpine, but mine was on the old Alpine Road, 7th North on that, and that's where I was raised, and I was born in a house there and was raised in that house there. And across the street from there was Ashby's fox farm. He had a whole bunch of foxes and big kind of ranch of foxes. And it smelled bad there. And I would go somewhere and people would say, "How do you stand the smell?" And I'd say, "I don't mind the smell. It's just when I go somewhere else, it doesn't smell right to me." But anyway, we had a chicken farm there. Almost everybody, or a lot of people in American Fork had chickens. They didn't have big chickens like some people have now, but just 2,000 or 3,000 chickens, and that's where we got our money. Uh-huh. We needed money to pay the taxes and the bills, but
Was that for eggs or for the meat?
For the eggs.
Eggs, okay.
And we then had a cow. We got our milk and butter, and we had pigs, and we had our own meat. But we needed some money, and the chickens provided that money. Mm-hmm. And so we always had really good food, but I guess we weren't very rich. We had 3 acres there, and my dad built the chicken coops. He had been a miner up at the American Fork Canyon, but his lungs got bad, and they told him he had to give that up, and so he got the chickens and had the acres. He had 2 big gardens. We had raised strawberries and raspberries and peaches and pears and currants and gooseberries, and it was quite a life. And that was where I was raised, and it was in the old 4th Ward, where we all walked to church. And I was famous for walking from school to primary every Tuesday, and got awarded several copies of the Book of Mormon for perfect attendance. That was my main church, heroics.
So you did it in wintertime and summertime and everything, huh?
Yes, it just never occurred to me to not go to primary. And I had good primary teachers, and I'll forever be grateful for them.
Well, I don't know a lot about Utah history. You said your father mined up in American Fork.
Yes.
Canyon, was it coal or what was it?
It was silver and other metals.
Oh, okay.
And it was big time. American Fork Canyon is just across the mountain from Alta Ski Resort.
Oh, okay.
And I didn't know that when I was growing up. I just went up the canyon, but American Cave was there, but that wasn't the. They even had a railroad up American Fork Canyon to bring the ore out.
Okay,
it was big time stuff.
Yeah.
They had communities up the American Fork Canyon, and there's old cemeteries there where they're born in.
Okay.
So a lot of people made a lot of money up American Fork Canyon, but mining, but not coal mining, but silver and other things. And my dad was a great miner and became a kind of a team leader of miners. And they'd find a vein of ore and make a lot of money. And those days are gone, I guess.
Yeah. Now, you say your neighbor raised foxes. Why do you raise foxes? What do you do with foxes?
You sell them, and they make fur coats.
Oh, okay.
Women used to love fur coats.
Oh.
Now people hate fur coats because they don't want the foxes to be killed for such a frivolous purpose.
Yes.
So things changed, like you say, boy. American Fork has changed. In the olden days, you knew everybody.
Right.
We had 3,333 people, and I remember that because of all the threes. But everything changed when the war, and then the Geneva Steel, and then you people from California started to come
Yeah,
up.
we started coming up and raising property values. Now, well, we still celebrate American Fork Steel Days.
Yes.
And I did some reading on that because I was curious why Steel Days. And I guess over by the lake, was it on the west side of the lake where the steel was, or was it on the
east side of the lake? It was on the
east side, okay.
And, but that changed American Fork. And they built little villages of houses. We'd all just build a house here and a house there. People could, if you didn't have any money, you could start to build a house. You build a basement and live in it for 3 years in a basement. And then when you got more money, you could build it up. There was no codes.
That answers a question.
Yeah.
I live in American Fork. I live west of the 15. I'm in what's called Harbor Village. Our ward's on 1100 South, I think it is.
Yes.
Okay. And there's still some farmlands there.
Yes.
But I live in that area. So I'm just down, probably a 3-minute drive down to the dock into the lake.
Yes.
So I'm really close.
I know where you live then.
Okay. But there is within our stake a house that is just a basement with a roof. And they had it up for sale within this last year.
Yes.
And sometimes I would drive by it and I go, what happened? Did they not have money to finish? Does anybody actually live in there? And I still don't know if they've sold it. I haven't driven by it, but they actually had it up for sale. But that's what was happening then.
Yes.
People would build the basement and live there until they could afford it.
That's right.
Okay.
And that was very common.
And what did they do? Did they just lift the roof up and build, or did they destroy the roof? Or?
There was kind of the foundation and just build a house on top of where they'd been living in the basement. They had a roof on the basement.
Yeah.
And I hadn't thought of that for a while, but that was what but everybody knew everybody. There were 4 wards, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th ward, and Highland had a ward and Alpine had a ward. And that was the stake, Alpine stake. And it was course, in our memories, everything's kind of wonderful, but I long to see it the way it was. You know, everybody, I think, that lives someplace wishes it could stay the way it was.
Yeah, well,
but it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. Things change.
American Fork used to be kind of bigger than Pleasant Grove and Lehigh, and now Lehigh is far, far, far bigger than American Fork.
Yeah.
Because American Fork was kind of hemmed in.
Yeah, it is.
And Lehigh had all this big land up around the point of the mountain.
Yeah, I'm surprised how big Lehigh is and how
Lehigh's
much it
big.
extends out. It's quite. I love American Fork. I really like it. It's our stake, I think, has 8 wards. We're in the West Stake now.
Yeah.
And that was split up. But there's so much building now across from the tracks there. The front runner. They're building these apartments and they're just
dead developers, if they can find a piece of land, they're
and
building an apartment house.
And they are, and our ward was just changed recently, the boundaries.
Yes.
In fact, it's the first time I've ever heard our ward is that area I've described, and then they took some members that are a 5-minute drive away that live across from the front runner, and they're now part of our ward. Because they had to somehow divide this up, with, as you know, with the priesthood and all of that, and so it's just amazing.
But anyway, in those days, you didn't care if BYU won or the University of Utah won. All you cared about is, did we beat Lehigh, and did we beat Pleasant Grove? And the big quest was always to win the state tournament, in which we never were successful. Yeah. And so it was. You didn't look too kindly toward Lehigh with the people there, but it was. I was thinking how wonderful it was, and I thought, but there was polio and things like that was always haunting us, and we would always. The only place to go swimming, there wasn't any swimming pools except at Saratoga. You know where Saratoga is? It's now a town, but it used to be a swimming resort, and boy, it was something to go to Saratoga and go swimming, and you probably don't care about that, but I'm reminiscing there.
Yes, that's
about
great.
The joy.
I'd love to hear about this.
Joy of being able to go to Saratoga. We had to go through Lehigh to get there, which wasn't one of our favorite things to do. But that was the way it was, and only 1 or 2 cars came to school. The teachers brought cars. None of the students had cars except a couple had Model A's, and so. It wasn't a problem with a bunch of cars, and most people, you could ride the school bus if you lived a mile or more away, but most of you walked to school.
Yeah, you'd walk to school.
High school was on the hill there, and now it's the recreation center, I think. That's where the high school was.
Yeah.
And
now, the tabernacle, the Alpine Tabernacle, you saw that built.
I didn't see it built. It was before my time, but
it was?
It was a part of my life. I always remember
okay.
That's where I got baptized and everything.
Okay, I have no idea how old that building is.
Yeah, I don't.
We have our state conferences
between 30s and 40s or so.
Oh, okay, all right.
Might have been built.
Yeah.
But it was. The Alpine Stake used to go Lehigh, in the olden days.
Yeah,
but then
it's quite large.
Yeah.
Do you know Alan Christensen?
I don't know.
He lived in American Fork forever. He just passed away. He was our patriarch.
I knew the
but he lived in California for a long time and then came and bought land in American Fork.
I didn't know those folks as well as I did the generational people in American Fork. And all that land, the freeway, which we take for granted, was not there, and it took innumerable acres of farmland to take that swath.
Yeah.
So all the kids would get jobs down thinning beets and weeding onions, and I hated summers because that meant I had to go down there and work on those farms. But there was a lot of farmers that had onions and beets and those kind of crops, and from American Fork down to the lake, down in your part of there's a lot of all these farms. I myself, as a high school kid, found out you could be if you owned land, I could come to you and say, if you'll plow my land and let me have an acre, I'll plant celery and we'll divide the profits.
Oh, okay.
American Fork became very famous for celery. Utah celery was a premium back in New York, and that advertised Utah celery. So some guys made a really lot of money growing celery.
Wow.
And I tried it, and then that was the year that New Yorkers decided they could grow their own celery. So I was able to buy a bike instead of a car.
I was told at one time the lake flooded and part of it went in, part of it into American Fork, where I live. Is that true?
I think it came up pretty high anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, Utah Lake, and there used to be a big resort, but this was kind of before my time down toward Linden.
Okay.
And there was a resort there where people could go swimming. And so we had a theater in American Fork, and the movie would be Sunday and Monday they'd play a movie, and then Tuesday and Wednesday they'd play a movie, and Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So you could go to the movie 3 or 4 times a week and see a different show.
Is that the one on Main Street? There's an old one on Main Street.
That was what it became. It used to be down the road a little ways from there, but the same owner built the new one that you know now. So we'd all walk down to the movie and be afraid to walk home because it would be about mummies or something. We could get home without going close to the cemetery, which we tried to go out of the way because we were afraid to walk past the cemetery. But we'd walk to the show and see 2 or 3 shows a week. No television, of course, as you know. Yeah. But it was good life.
Yeah.
And but our chapel only hold about 100 people, and there are 1,500 in the ward or so. So maybe not that, maybe 1,000. But people didn't go to church like they do now.
Oh.
It was in my boyhood that the Grand Richards and others decided that 10 or 12% going to church was not good enough, and they put an emphasis on going to church. In the olden days, the guy, an old farmer, he had talked to him, and he died in the old Mormon, but he probably didn't go to church.
Wow.
And then the temple would be where you'd go once, but you didn't really keep going. Some did, but the majority would never go back to the temple. They just get married. Those that got married there, they didn't really go back.
And that would be the Salt Lake Temple.
That's right.
And how long did it take to get from American Fork to Salt Lake at that time?
It'd take about a little over an hour.
About an hour, okay.
We had an electric train called the Interurban, sometimes called the Orem. I think that was a guy's name but it went through started in Provo and went up through Orem and Pleasant Grove, and you could catch that train and go to Salt Lake City if you wanted to go to the temple. My mother used to do that.
Oh.
But it was a kind of unusual, and it got so that if a kid from American Fork had been to California, he was a celebrity. Mm-hmm. But going to Salt Lake was kind of a special event.
Yeah, I would imagine, yeah.
So you mainly just shopped at Chipman's store in American Fork or other stores, and you didn't go to Salt Lake much. But
well, I find that interesting that you said church attendance wasn't a priority.
It didn't seem to be, as far as I knew. Herbie Palacio. I used to go to church because my mother was really dyed in the wool Mormon. She could have the governor of Utah in her house, and she'd say, "Well, I'm going to sacrament meeting was, of course, at night." And so there was some that went all the time, but the vast majority didn't come to church. And
I didn't know that.
Smoking was a big deal in those days.
Oh, it was?
All kinds of things like that. But they were, like I gave a talk in American Fork once about it, and they had kind of a heritage day. I talked about my father, who did go to the temple but never went back and didn't keep his temple covenants, and I said, I don't know what's going to happen to him in the great hereafter. And some of his old buddies surrounded me after and said, "You're Bert Durrant, your father, be a lot better in heaven and higher in heaven than you'll ever be. But they judged the man in those days kind of, what was he, an honest guy? And obituaries it was always, they'd praise their honesty and do a day's work. But it was golden days for me, even though I didn't like to work on the farms, and there was not McDonald's or anything. We just had a place called the Owl Inn where you could buy a hamburger. But people don't like, the young people don't like to hear these kind of stories because they don't like old guys talking about the old. Well, but it's fun for old guys.
I've always found it fascinating, even when I was young, to hear people tell about how they grew up and how things were different, and I think there's a lot to learn from past generations and how they lived and everything. Well, I want to move on here. You're an author. I keep hearing about you've written about 50 books, but I was amazed at the books you've written. Short stories, novels, children's books, personal essays.
Yeah.
I looked on Amazon. Some of the books are still available. And let's see, what is that one about the star or A Touch of Christmas? I think someone wrote a review and said they read it every Christmas and they cry every year.
A lot of people. I have 2 Christmas books, and
the other one's about the star. What is it?
Don't Forget the Star.
Don't Forget the Star. Yes.
And then the other one is Let Thine Alms Be in Secret. And I have done quite a lot with very limited talent. I'm not a scholar, and when I taught at BYU religion, which I did 2 or 3 times for a total of 7 or 8 years, but while the others were studying the doctrines, I was memorizing the names of my students. So I became a very popular teacher because I knew the names of my students, and my classes would grow. I'd get 200 or 300 in a class. And I mention that because I'm not an intellectual guy, and I very seldom quote anybody but myself. And fortunately for me, my life was not filled with great successes, so I can talk about myself without bragging, because I didn't have much to brag about. I talk about my goals were to be all-state in basketball, but then I say I never could do that because the coach liked me best and kept me on the bench near him all during the game. I wanted to be student body president, but I couldn't because the students didn't know what a leader was. I wanted to be popular with the girls, but the girls were dumb. So I can talk about myself in a self-depreciating way.
Yes.
And my books are filled with my own heart instead of my own mind.
Yes.
So when I've written 50 books, many of them are very, very short. And people like my books because people are not too intellectual, the vast majority of the church. We're getting close to talking about what you wanted to talk about, but I'm not a gospel scholar. If you wanted to talk doctrine, I'm more of a cheerleader for doctrine. I like to tell people how wonderful it is to be able to pay your tithing, and what a glorious thing it is to go on a mission. I talk about missions in such a way that I'd say when I was mission president or at the MTC President, I would get people who wanted to go home and give up their mission and go home. And I would say to them, they would say, could I still be a bishop if I didn't go on to the mission? I'd say, yes. Could I still be married? I'd tell them, well, yes. They'd say, well, then what would I miss? And I said, you would miss your mission. You'd never have the thrill of having missionary companions, getting up when you didn't want to get up, and going out in a blizzard when you didn't want to go. And their mission becomes your most treasured memory. You can't walk away from this. You got to have your mission. So I cheerlead for things. Brother Bernard, if you wanted to hear doctrine, you'd go to hear Brother Millett or somebody speak. But if you wanted to be thrilled with being a member of the church, you'd maybe come to my class.
Well, I think...
Because that's where I spend my time. And all my books, very few quotes. It's all just...
Well, you mentioned that you wanted to be in the NBA. Well, you were, through your son.
Yes.
You did make it.
Well, one of the... I worked a lot with the brethren, particularly Brother Packer. And he told me once, George, he said, it's better to have a son that achieves great things than it is to achieve great things yourself. Because you get greater thrill out of what your kids do than what you ever did. So I did have a son who played, and I go to the games now. I used to go to the games, and everybody that saw me would go, how many points is your son going to make tonight? I was a big wheel because of my son. But now, nobody knows. Yeah. We go to the temple, Susan and I, and people there know us. We go to the mall, and people don't know us. Our main people that have any memory of Susan, East and Black. Like my son, most people, even though he was kind of he was an All-American, but nobody knows that anymore. Your fame is very fleeting.
Yes, it is.
It comes and you think it to be lasting forever, but it does not.
You're
soon forgotten.
Yes.
But best way to be remembered is probably to write a hymn for the hymn book, or to write write a book, not the kind of books that nobody will remember me because of the kind of books I wrote, but if you write a really significant book, you might be like Bruce R. McConkie. Yeah. But even him is kind of fading.
Yeah, it is fading. Now, you spent a lot of time with Brother Packer. What did you learn from him?
Everything. He was my mentor. When I was kind of a late bloomer. I went on a mission finally, and that's where I found myself. I found myself on a mission. I found out that people in England looked at me, and I could tell what they were thinking. They were thinking, I bet he was All-State, and I bet he was student body president. His body popular. None of that was true, but I never told him. So I walked around England for 2 years like I was really somebody, and I never got over it. I became what I say, the greatest average missionary the church has ever had. And I came home and decided not to give up that sacred ground I had captured. I wanted to continue on instead of thinking, going backwards like some do. I just hung on to the church. So then I got in college and a bunch of us American Forkers went over to BYU because we didn't want to work. We just wanted to go to school. And when we got there, we played basketball during history and ping pong during sociology. And we all got letters inviting us to stay home and not come back to BYU. They all believed their letters and quit and got driving trucks and doing other things, working at Geneva. I tried to quit, and my mother wouldn't let me. She said, you got to go to school. And I said, I'm not doing any good. My grades are terrible and everything. And she says, yeah, but what you're going to do in life, you got to go to school to do. I said, what am I going to do? She said, I have no idea, but you got to go to school to do it. I said, I'm quitting. She started to cry, so I said, well, I'll go back. So I went back, and all my friends were not there. I went to class and sat there, and in the back where I always sat, and I saw a seat down at the front, and I went down to the front and sat in the front. And I remember in class the teacher said something bad about the church, and just to provoke us. And nobody answered, and he said, does anybody want to comment on what I said? And I thought, I do, but I don't make comments because I was shy. He said, do anybody want to make a comment? And my hand went up, and he said, what's your name? I said, George. He said, George who? I said, George Durrant. He said, what's your comment? And I started to talk, and he watched me talk, and everybody was listening to me. And I thought, when I finished, he said, what's your name? And I said, George. And he said, George who? I said, George Durrant. He said, did you all hear what George Durrant just said? And so I got interested in school. And I decided I needed a major, and I told a professor who had taken an interest in me, I don't know what to major in. And he says, well, what are you good at? And I said, I think nothing. He said, you must be good at something. I said, I'm in elementary school, I could draw pictures better than the others. He said, why don't you major in art? And I said, gee, I didn't know you could major in something fun like that. He says, yeah. He says, you can major in drama or anything you want. I thought you had to be a chemist or an engineer.
No.
So he said, yeah. So I took an art class and became an artist. And then instead of wanting not to go to school, I tried to run the class. All the classes started making sense. And I loved my professors. I loved classes. And so then it was time to get a job, and I almost signed a contract to go to California and teach art, but some lady, I can't even remember who it was, she said, are you a seminary teacher? And I said, no. And she says, you just look like a seminary teacher. So I thought, maybe I'll look into that. So I went and looked into it and was interviewed by Elder Packer, who was not a general authority, he was over seminary.
Is that how you got to know him?
Yeah. I said, I didn't interview well, because when I wanted something, I kind of didn't interview well, and I interviewed very poorly with him, and he told me, well, we don't have that many jobs in that, but we'll keep you in mind. And I left knowing I would never be hired. But the lady said, here's some forms you need to fill out so we have an application. And it called for 3 letters of recommendation. One was Phil Jensen, my stake president, and another one was my bishop at BYU. Another one was a teacher, and Elder Packer called me the next week and said, come up, I want to talk to you. And he says, walked in, he says, Ken, do you have any friends who can write letters? And I said, what are you talking about? He says, all 3 of these people came in and told me I had to hire you. So he said, welcome aboard. And
wow.
Then he was very big on the Indian placement, or Indian program. You know, Spencer Kimball used to love the Indians, and Brother Packer loved the Indians, and they had an Indian school at Brigham City, Elder Packer's hometown. And Elder Packer, I think, said that he kind of took an interest in me. And he'd come to Brigham City, where he assigned me to teach a regular school, and go down to the Indian school after school and teach. He'd come and he wanted to know what I thought of the Indians. I'd say, I like them, but I'm good with the other regular kids. I'm better with them than I am with the Indians. But when finally the Lord spoke to me and told me, hey, you belong with the Indians. And so I told him that, and he and I became really, really close. And he'd sometimes take me to state conferences and things like that. And he really had his eyes on me. Always, he told me, don't take any church assignment without talking to me. And I just adored him, because he was... I went once with him, and we were driving through the night, and he said, have you got any questions you want to ask me? Because he's not a talker, Elder Packer. He wasn't a good conversationalist. He said, you got any question? And I said, yeah. And he said, and then we went about 10 miles, and I didn't ask. And I said, I figured out my question. And he says, what is your question? I said, how can I get answers without asking you? How can I get my own answers? he said, and he didn't answer, and we drove another 10 miles in silence, and finally he said, I said, I'm sorry to ask you such a dumb question. He says, it's the best question I've ever been asked. And he tried to explain to me. I thought he was wise. I thought he could see afar off. I thought he was a real... So he always did. I did a lot of things in the church, and I think he's the one that opened the doors for those. They say one friend in the court is better than 1,000 friends in the courtyard. So when something had come up in the church, like president of the Missionary Training Center, he would say, I think we ought to have George Durrant do that. So I owe my many opportunities to him.
To Brother Packer.
So it's who you know, but it's not good enough to know you. It's what they know about you.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think that's always the case, and that answers the question because you wrote a Navajo curriculum.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm going, how did you get involved in that? Now that answers the question.
When my mother was paying my way to school, and I was taking art, it was very expensive for her. She didn't have any money. And she said, I'll buy your art stuff, but you're not going to, the paintings you paint are not going to be with a paintbrush, they're going to be with words. She said, you'll be a writer. And so I did a lot of writing. And then Elder Packer wanted me to be at the Indian School in Brigham City, so he arranged for me to be the principal there, and I became involved with the Indians, and I was really into it. I mean, I didn't care who won ball games or anything. All I cared about was what's going to happen to the Indians. And President Kimball was still powerful and running it, and Elder Packer loved the Indians, and George Durrant loved the Indians. And I told the seminary leaders that we don't have any good material for the Indians curriculum. And they said, well, why don't you write some? So I wrote some, and I got some acclaim for the lessons I'd write for the Indians. And then Elder...
Well, now, was this in their language?
No, I didn't know their language.
Okay.
I knew their hearts. I told the story, and I hope I'm not talking too much, but there was an Indian lady in Brigham City, and she had a little boy, and he went to see this non-Indian family, and they had a dog that just had pups. And the little Indian boy liked the pups, and the guy told him, here, we'll put them in a box and put them in your wagon, and you can take them home. So he got home, and the mother, the Indian mother, when she saw those dogs and heard that the man had given to, I said, you don't have to guess how she felt about having all these dogs. I said, you don't have to guess how an Indian feels. He feels just like you. And that was my philosophy, that, hey, if I could write something that touched my heart, it would touch the heart of an Indian. Instead of talking about a little boy growing up and having Quaker Puff Rice Krispies for breakfast and sliding down the banister and doing everything a normal family would do, I talked about how a little Indian boy in a Hogan and how he would feel. And I wrote all these Indian stories and for little children, and the missionaries would teach them. They were all made into film strips. Remember film strips?
I remember film strips.
And the missionaries were the teachers, so they weren't good teachers. They could put in this film strip and have a successful lesson. And then they said, you've got good lessons for children, but you haven't got anything for teenagers. So I wrote a series called Tom Trails that was about an Indian boy in high school. And he was a struggler and all. Had a girlfriend named Lily, and when those got out, they came out 2 or 3 at a time because they were being produced when school started, and Indian kids started coming these teenagers would come, they wanted to see Tom Trails. And there was a song in there called Life's Your Own Tom Trails, and all the actors were Indians and all the voices were Indians, and it really went over big. And the seminary officials said, boy, we've seen those, and we want them used for not just Indians. We want to. So the whole church for 3 or 4, they were tied to the Old Testament. For 3 or 4 cycles, every kid in the church knew about Tom Trails. And student body presidents would make the announcements in the morning and say, "Hello, this is Tom Trails." And I went to the basketball tournament and they played the song Tom Trails, and somebody said, "Well, what school song is that?" He said, "It's not a school song, that's Tom Trails." So it was shown all over the world, and that's really what made me decide to write books. The way I wrote Tom Trails, I'd just close the door and tell the secretary not to bother me, and I would invite a bunch of Indians into my office in my imagination. I'd talk to them and tell them stories and write them down, and that's the way Tom Trails. So that's why I became an author. And then I wrote about being a father, wrote about having a mother, I wrote about Christmas. Nothing profound. Somebody said that the gospel is very deep, but most of the saints, and you'll kind of agree with this, I think, are drinking off the top quarter inch of the water. And I wrote for people who were heart to heart.
Well,
that's why.
I think those are needed. Yeah, I'm looking at some titles here. Great dads and grandfathers, becoming a priesthood man.
Yeah, all that. You got the picture.
Yeah.
Brother Bernard, you got the picture of what I did, and people understood me, and they knew that I was about like them, and men unusually took kindly to me. I would tell them how to be a father. And how to treat a wife, and a lot of people. My first book was called Love at Home, starring Father, and it was in the days when a new book was really something. New books now, nobody cares. They can't even get them in bookstores because people are not like they used to be. They used to love to have books. And my books were little, and some of these old guys who never read a book would tell me, "I read your whole book from cover to cover." And they liked it because and I liked my talks because some girl told me that she came to a youth conference. She said, "Thanks for talking with us instead of to us."
Yeah. Well, I had a sample of that. It's available. Amazing what's on the internet. But you spoke at BYU. What was it? The number one
Christian.
Number one. Yeah. And I watched that. I go, wow, he's a good speaker. Yeah, because and it's very personal what you do and how you speak, and you've got a great sense of humor.
My sense of humor probably was too good.
Got you in trouble?
Never got me in trouble, but it kind of, I became known as Will Rogers, and
well, that's quite a compliment.
And people would say, they'd compliment me by saying, "Boy, that was the funniest talk I've ever heard." And I think, because I found that if I made them laugh, I could also make them cry. And if you got them laughing, then you can punch them.
Yeah.
And they take it.
Yeah.
You think, "Yeah, I'm going to do that." So when I was asked to be president of the Missionary Training Center, some of the brethren said, "Well, we love George and that, but he's too funny. I don't think that's what they need at the Missionary Training Center." And Elder Packer says, "Well, I'll fix that." So he caught me and he said, when it comes to a sense of humor, you're a number 10. And he says, "You can't be a 10 at the MTC. I'll let you be up to 5, but," he said, "Well, you promised me you'll never go above 5 in humor." I said I would, and I did at the MTC, but I was always pushing forward. Because the missionaries there were having nervous breakdowns there. And they loved, it's not bragging, I hope, but I was very much loved by the missionaries there. And the general authorities would come and speak, and the line wanted to shake hands with, but the big line was over with me. And it was because I would tell them things like I was the greatest average missionary. Because most of them knew they were pretty average. I remember speaking there once, and some guy played the piano and other guys sang, and I said, for all of you who would never be able to do that, I want to talk to you. You can be a great missionary without being kind of a great man. You can succeed with what you've got.
Right, yeah.
Well, now they liked that.
What did you, serving at the MTC as president, what did you walk away from? I mean, what did you learn most as serving in that position?
Well, I became rather famous because it's a story that I didn't tell, but others told. There was a kid there, and it was a missionary who was smoking in a closet in the MTC. And so the security people found him, and then they dragged him into my office. And my counselor was there, and I said, well, what's the story? And he said, well, he was smoking. And I said, well, do we have a no smoking sign in that closet? And he said, my counselor said, I don't think there's a no smoking sign there. And I said, maybe this is our fault. Maybe we should have had a no smoking sign there. And everybody was dumbfounded. And I said to the elder, is that the last time you'll ever smoke? He says, that's the last time I'll ever smoke. I said, then get back to class. I had a lot of mercy. But boy, I came there at a time when they said that some were coming there knowing that they would never be sent home. And they said, we're sending you there, George, but you're to clean that, make that clean down there, and no missionary's going to stay there who's been immoral in that recently. And
right. Now, what years did you serve?
86 to 88.
Okay.
And I couldn't send any missionaries home, but I would give talks, and then they would line up to talk to me, and I couldn't send them home. That wasn't my power, but I could make it known to the general authorities that this is what this young man or young woman did, and they would send them home. But I was the one who had to call their mother and father and say, your son is so honest. He couldn't keep on telling the truth. And because he told the truth, he's going to have to come home for a while. And and so he's just a great one. When he gets home, greet him, and they'd be crying. I'd say, I just can't begin to tell you what a great son you have. And then they'd come to get him, and I would have all the other missionaries from his district come out. We'd say, you're coming back. I tell the missionaries he'll be back. You go on your mission, and in a few months he'll be there. I learned then from that I had to serve justice, and but I love mercy. I love the little missionary who wasn't going to be an assistant to the president. That was a major part of him. And I just liked it. I could go to their class and talk to them in their classes, and I would go to the lunch line and stand there, and a big gathering, 10 or 12 would gather around me, and that mission, the cafeteria guy would say, Brother President Durrant, don't come out here. We got to get them fed. But I couldn't help it. I tried. I had a reputation at BYU that I knew every student's name. which wasn't true, but I had that reputation because they knew I tried. So there was a rumor that even though I had thousands there, that I knew all their names, which wasn't. So, but I was personable. I would go to their classes. Once it was in September, and that's when watermelons are good in Utah, so I ordered a truckload of watermelons, and boy, my officials got mad. You can't do that. I said, I just want all of my missionaries to have watermelons. And so the truck rolled in, and it was a summer's day, and we had all the senior missionaries come out and cut up the watermelons on tables, and all the classes were dismissed, and we had watermelons. And the ones who were there said, I'll always remember the day he had the watermelons. That was the kind of president I was, and when I talked, I think they thought it was hard.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it was good to be 5 in humor.
Yes.
Is it not the end of the world, elders? You're going to make it.
Yeah.
Because it's pressure packed there. And you're bringing out the best in me, what may be the worst, I don't know, but you're a good interviewer, and that's the way I presided there, but it was heavy. But fortunately for me, all my kids were raised. And so I could, for the first time in a church assignment, my family always came first. And I had a stake president that, when I was a bishop in Salt Lake, that went all too long for the meetings. And I just told him, can't we stop the meetings and so I can go home and tell my kids good night? Because you get in a meeting sometimes and then the question, the meeting's over, but they'll say, anybody else have a question? And so then it goes on another half hour.
Yeah.
Elder Tuttle told me once, are you punctual? And I said, yeah, I start everything on time. He said, but are you punctual? I said, yeah, I start on time. It's not what I'm asking, do you stop on time?
Oh.
So I've been a big, but for the first time at the MTC, I didn't have to worry about getting home.
Yeah.
I put my whole heart and soul into it, and I was there on holidays. On 4th of July, I'd throw candy in the room like it was at a parade, and people remember me. They call me their president. I think a lot of very good MTC presidents, but the missionaries don't really recall who he was.
Right.
But I think if there's any missionary there, and I'm not saying I was right. I'm just saying I was me.
Yes.
And I couldn't be the big deal.
Right. And
I knew it wasn't the big deal, except I knew I was the big deal. I was the president.
Right. Well, and you had an impact upon the missionaries.
So that's the way that was.
My wife and I served at the MTC for 2 years. We helped missionaries who struggled to study the scriptures, how to study the scriptures.
Yes.
That's what we did. And then I later started working at the MTC as the lead interpreter for American Sign Language. I enjoyed my time at the MTC.
Oh, yeah.
It's a magical place. The spirit is just so strong there, and to be around those young men and young women, and it's just a special place.
I can't believe I was ever there, but it was. You caught the spirit of it. Some visitors came. They weren't members, but they were in the lobby, and one woman said, "What is the deal here?" She says, "It's different here. I've never felt anything like this just walking in here." So that was the MTC.
Yeah.
And
well, now I am looking. You're an artist, and these pictures of flowers behind you on the wall, I see your name on them. I love that picture you did. I think it's called "The Houses of the Lord." That painting.
Oh yeah.
And I looked at it, and for the listeners, it's a road, and there's houses on each side of the road, And of course, in the foreground, the background, there is the temple. It looks like the Mount Temple. But anyway, the title, Houses of the Lord, I began to look at, it's not just the house of the Lord, but those houses themselves are the houses of the Lord.
Thanks for mentioning that. That means a lot to me, because I perceive that you're a man who understands, because houses of the Lord, yeah. And I really try. I wanted to be an artist, but I have drifted toward more religious. I send out 300 Christmas cards every year.
Oh, wow.
To people that I've known. And this year is Christ standing at a crossroads, and the caption is, I am the way, and he's pointing toward this path that goes this way, and up to there is the temple. So I try to have a religious theme in the past.
And so these cards you pass out have a drawing you done.
One of my paintings.
One of your paintings.
And I'll give you one of those before you leave.
These are the flowers now. Those are in watercolor, right?
Yes, everything I do is watercolor.
Oh, okay.
I found out I could only be good at one thing. It's a little bit like violin. If you're going to play the violin, you can't play the trumpet.
Yeah.
So watercolors is my thing, and they fit me because I'm spontaneous, and watercolor usually, once you get the drawing done, is done within a 2-hour period.
Yeah.
Oil paintings, sometimes they spend endless hours on them.
Well, the oil has to dry, and
and I think watercolors are more George Durrant. They're spontaneous.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to have to ask you about your courtship with Susan, because when I interviewed Susan, she gave me her side of the story. And your wife was Marilyn, was that correct? Yes. Marilyn passed away in 2011, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes. And you were a widower for about 3 years.
Not that long.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you had to give, now I was a widower also, but I was a widower a much shorter time. My first wife died of cancer, and then I married Amy. But as a widower, what advice would you have for men who are widowed?
My advice to widowers are, don't listen to anybody else's advice. What I did was what I did because I'm George Durrant. And if you're Henry Jones, you would do something different. Yeah. Some feel that their first wife, I could never, ever marry again because of her. Right. I adored her, and I'm never going to marry again. And I think that's because they are quite content to be alone. Mm-hmm. But I'm a people person, and I tried being alone, but I wasn't good at it.
Or you weren't good at it.
No. So I said to my daughter, I'm going to start to date again. And she said, well, who would you date? And I said, I don't know. I know Susan Easton Black. But I said, she's out of my league. And my daughter said, Father, nobody's out of your league. And so I called her and went from there. But when I consider what's happened to me in the last 10 years that I've been married to her, mm-hmm. It would really have been a shame to not marry her, because I've had innumerable opportunities. I have found out that she's the main event, but like a musician has a preliminary act, mm-hmm. So when she speaks for 50 minutes, I speak at the beginning for 10 minutes. And I've found out I'm a better speaker on a short distance than I am at a marathon. So I've found a greater power in my 10-minute talks. Were filled with humor, but always with a punch. I don't tell jokes just to be funny. I tell jokes because I want to, and my jokes are not jokes. They're funny things that happen to me.
Yeah.
And like I said to my institute class that we had at St. George, man, I got my wife a $400 pair of earrings for her birthday. But I said I was really lucky because I was in Walmart and they had a sale on them. They were $20. And, you know, that kind of humor that. And so my advice to widowers is, if you feel like you need to be alone, to be loyal to your wife, or if your kids say, don't marry again, Father, because we don't want you to marry again. We want you to be ours and not marry again.
How many years did you know Susan before?
I first met Susan when I taught religion at BYU many years ago, and she popped onto the scene as a BYU presidents wanted a woman to be in the religion department.
Yeah.
And they'd had some part-time women, but they wanted a full-time faculty. So Susan was teaching business or something there, and they kind of coerced her, even got the president of the church to tell her to go and be in the religion. She didn't want to be the fireside queen. She wanted to speak in the Pentagon instead of to the stake center. And so I saw her then. And I'm really thrilled with the fact that probably there's never been a husband more faithful to his wife than I was to Marilyn. So, but I saw Susan and I thought, my word, she is really something. And I heard her speak and I thought, she's the best teacher we got here. And so when she came to BYU, I was there and I treated her real good. A lot of the teachers said, can't teach religion without holding the priesthood.
Right.
And they gave her a bad time. But so I knew her then, and that was many, many years ago. But I was totally dedicated to my wife and family. So nothing ever happened there except admiration. And then years and years went by, and then her husband died, and then my wife died so I did call her, as I said.
Yeah.
And then
that took courage to call her, though.
Oh yeah, I stood on that morning. I was going to. My friend, who's Pete Peterson, that was a big player in WordPerfect.
Oh, okay.
And he made millions there. And my son was mission president in Texas. This was 11 years ago, and he said, my dad, why don't you take him out to lunch? So Pete came and got me, and her husband was named Harvey Black, that had just died, and so he came, and then I was living in Harvey's circle in Cedar Hills. And then we went to dinner, and he says, I've invited another BYU professor. And I said, who's that? And I said, Susan Easton. Oh, I said, I know her, I like her. So we got a sizzler, and I remember I said, we all got talking about how old we were, and I told him I was 81, and I could see the lights go out in her eyes, because if she had any interest, that wasn't in somebody that was 13 years older than her. So, but she did say, here's my phone number, and if you ever, you need to talk about losing your spouse, I know a lot about that. So I didn't call her, and then I talked to my daughter and called her, and she was thrilled because she admired me. And when you say it took courage, when I was going to go see her for the first time, there's a stream in the park where I always walked in the morning, and I stood on a stone that was jutted out into the stream and told Heavenly Father, I'm going to go see Susan Easton Black, and I'm scared I'm not worthy to see her. And I had felt the Spirit said, if you're not worthy, why don't you get worthy and call her? So I called her, and she was thrilled because, and we met on her doorstep, and I was dressed in my navy blue suit. And I was talking about being a priesthood man. I said, I stood there and didn't want to ring the doorbell. I was scared, but I said, I'm a priesthood man, and I'm wearing a navy blue suit, and I'm standing up straight. And I rang the doorbell, and I hear the pitter-patter of her feet. And she came to the doorway, and there she was. And she literally fell into my arms because we were both needed somebody. And on that very visit, I asked her to marry me. But I did it because I'm a missionary, and missionaries, the good ones say, the reason we're here is we don't have to be baptized, but first you have to find out the gospel's true. Right. I said, so I'd like you to be associated with me, and as quick as you fall in love with me, we'll get married. And so it took a lot of courage.
Yes.
Because she is classy, and she's so wonderful, and life has been so good with her. Not any better than it was with my former wife, but she was really been good for me. Mm-hmm. And I would be probably in a rest home. And when the morning of our marriage, I got sick. I was scared to death. I couldn't hardly walk, and I went to the hospital, and she was there, and I said, you don't want to marry me. And her sons were there, and they said, well, she said, well, I'm willing to still, if you will. And Elder Pedersen, you ever heard of Herschel Pedersen?
No.
Too bad he's not still alive. You would want to interview him. He was a great soul. And his daughter was the nurse there. She called him, and Herschel was famous for giving blessings that came true. And he gave me a blessing and said, you'll still call thousands to repentance. And that gave her the courage. So we got married, and since then I've had given more talks. COVID kind of stopped it, but we were given 3 or 4 talks a week, and I'd always give this 10-minute talk at the beginning of her talk. And so she brought me back to life, and she's kept me.
That's wonderful.
Kept me alive.
Well, I read somewhere that it was President Kimball that sealed you to Maryland.
Yes.
And that he was 3 hours late. Is that true?
I think it was.
Now, my question is, what's going through everybody's mind at the temple when the sealer's 3 hours late? How was Maryland feeling at the time?
I think we felt like it's worth it to have him do it. And there were only 10 of us or so there, and it wasn't like the big crowds you see now. Right. And we were just talking and had a good time. Because they told us he was coming, but he'd be late. And so we waited. That's interesting you bring that up. One thing you've accomplished here is I've really come to admire you. I think you're a great interviewer because you have a good heart. So that's my story, and there's a lot more to it, but those are some of the highlights.
Well, let's turn to the scriptures. Before we started recording, you asked me, is reading the scriptures the same as studying? And yes. I said, no, it's different. And I have quotes from our general authorities to back that up. But you said that you're more of a reader.
Yes. This morning I found out I'm famous for another reason, and that is when people ask me, how you doing? I don't say fine. I say, this is my best day. And it shocks them.
Isn't there a book title?
Yes.
You wrote a book with something about that title?
But then if you say that, I said that I was looking for a better answer to how are you than fine. So I came up with the idea of champion. How are you, George? I'd say champion. And I didn't like that after saying it for a while. So I would say, how are you? And I'd say, it's nearly perfect. And I said that to Elder Packer, and he says, what's keeping you from being perfect? And I said, I still lie. So to be able to say, it's my best day, you sometimes have to lie. Yeah. But then, you make it your best day. Which brings us to reading the scriptures. I read this morning from the Book of Mormon, in the Book of Mormon, the way they were defeated finally. And I could see it all. And I could see him, that he tried so hard to save those folks, but they wouldn't. And I found that I have a better day if I read, and I don't read much. I read one chapter, but I read it not because what it does to my head, but what it does to my heart. And there are certain chapters where I just can't hardly get to the end because I want to tell the Lord, thank you for this wonderful book. And I'm a happier man. And then Susan reads at night because we're trying to read now the whole thing, front to back. So I read it. I don't care if I remember it. I care about how it makes me feel when I read it. And I read it out loud. And I try to play all the parts. And I like the way it's written. It's not a good commas and the places to pause. But I'm not an authority on the book. I taught the Book of Mormon. That's when I studied the Book of Mormon. You have to study if you're going to be a teacher. So that's when I really came to understand the Book of Mormon. And I was constantly applying it to life. And so I really studied it. But I'm not a scholar, and I wished I was. I wished I could go to a conference and really teach them something about the scriptures. And I usually have a scripture-based talk, but it's not to teach them how the intricacies. But I envy those who can do that. And so now at this stage of life, I'm trying to keep from being a grumpy old guy. I'd like to be a pleasant guy. I'd like really to be a pleasant guy. I'd like to go out, and I don't know if I can do this because when you get old, you kind of get some ailments that make you tend to be toward being ornery and that, thinking you know everything. I just like to be a pleasant fellow, and the Book of Mormon helps me to be a pleasant fellow. And then at the end of the reading, I usually try to say rather a long prayer about things that are. I found that I spend most of my prayer praising the Heavenly Father and letting Him know what a privilege it is to worship Him, and His great plan, and His giving us His Son. And I think He likes that. He likes us to worship Him. I don't even know what the word worship means. I know you worship at church, but I don't know that you do. But you do because you're going to church. But just privately worship Him and let Him know, hey, thank you. You really helped me. And I found out the only prayer that I get answers to all the time is a prayer for strength. I found out you can't change a lot of stuff, especially when you have other people's agencies involved. But you can always have the strength. I've never had a prayer for strength that's not been answered, and I don't think anybody else has it. It gives you the power to deal with things as they really are. And And sometimes these prayers have changed things, but a lot of times
Yeah.
you go right ahead and
Yeah.
die or whatever.
Now, you said that Susan reads at night. Do the two of you read together at night, or is it just her reading?
She reads.
Oh, she reads, and you're listening?
Yeah.
Okay.
And she says, she asks me questions about what's the next word, and to make sure I'm awake.
Awake.
Which she's really a faithful member of the church, but she wishes the Lord could give her a better deck of cards. But at the same time, for example, she saved her money this year so that she could pay tithing in January for the whole year. Because she longs for certain blessings that she wants to have the tithing already in there. She loves the church, but she's a brilliant lady, and she could question things about it. But that's not her choice. She loves Joseph Smith and loves the church and loves the temple, and I better not falter or I'd catch all kinds of HE double hockey sticks from her. She's into it, and that doesn't mean she's not intellectually knows that and when people are leaving the church, she can give them good answers for to stay, but they don't want the answers anyway.
Right.
My answer is as good as any, because they're not looking for answers, they're looking for further questions. And so she could tell them all kinds of things about Joseph Smith that could counter anything they've been hearing.
Right.
But that doesn't matter to them.
Yeah.
And we love them too. So.
Yeah.
But they've got their agencies, and they just leave us to have ours.
Well, I've enjoyed this time with you. In fact, I was thinking, man, I could just stay here the rest of the day and we could talk, and I enjoyed the time with you. It's
I can see why you're doing what you're doing. I didn't know why, but now I know.
I enjoy it, and I thought I just need to have dinner with you and Susan and just talk.
Yeah.
Because you're both amazing people, and I've really enjoyed the time and want to thank you for that time. Well, as I told you earlier, before we started recording, I'd like to end with your testimony.
Yes. Well, I think when I was working at a service station for Leonard Kelly in American Fork, I for some reason I was going to BYU, and I studied the Savior, and I became a real fan. I became a fan of Jesus Christ, and I thought maybe working here at the service station, I should act like I was him. And I was really nice to people who came in. In those days, you really said, "You want to check your tires?
Yeah.
And check your oil?" And I'd do their windshield so that, and I'd make it clean, and I'd be real cheerful to the folks. And they told Leonard Kelly, we come here because old George Durrant, he really treats us royally, and we like to see him. He's always happy. And so I've had a testimony of Jesus Christ. He was my first really touch with religion. I didn't know the Book of Mormon was true, and I didn't know it wasn't true. I didn't think it was too big an issue. And then my bishop really liked me. His name was Mel Grant, and he was a highway patrolman. And I tell the people when I speak, some of you old guys probably remember him. You probably met him on the highway when you were speeding, but he really liked me, and he told me there was a new deal. One missionary could go from each ward, and because the Korean War was on, I was in the National Guard, and the National Guard said they'd let me go, but when I got home, the draft board told me, you can go, but when you get home, you'll be drafted the first week. So I left, got to go on a mission, got to England, and still didn't know the church was true, but I didn't know that was a big issue, or I thought it probably was. And then I was asked to give a presentation on Joseph Smith to the other missionaries in my district, about 12 of them. And so I studied, because they had all given presentations. And of course, they were far better than me because they'd been out there, and I was amazed at how great they were. And so I wanted to look good. So I studied Joseph Smith and practically memorized the story of his first vision. And I stood up to speak there in England. And I was anxious to make sure I got every word right. All of a sudden, I couldn't talk anymore, and I started to be choked up and very emotional as I talked about him seeing God in Jesus Christ. And I felt a little embarrassed until I looked, and all of them were crying. And I went on to tell about his persecution and his martyrdom and all. And went back to my seat and sat there and sobbed. And of course they all comforted me. And they were in the same spirit. And boy, I think back upon that night and that day, and I became a real testimony-bearing missionary. I had power, and I found out that I tell this story that this girl named Louise, I really liked her, and I was sitting behind her in a class in school and didn't dare talk to her because I was too timid. But then my friend Don over here, who was a real ladies' man, he wrote a note to me and said, ask Louise if she'll go to the movie with me Friday night. With that note in hand, I said to Louise, with all kind of boldness, I said, do you want to go to the movie Friday night? She said, yes. I said, all right, old Don over there, he wants to take you. I used that story to say that's what happened to me on a mission. I knew it wasn't George Durrant that was asking him to be baptized. It was Jesus Christ. He gave me a note to ask him to be baptized. And I became very bold, and that's what I used to tell the missionaries, hey, you're not any more timid than me, but you and I, we're not here out there telling our story. We're out there telling his. You're his agent. That's why athletes have agents, because athlete can't speak for himself, but an agent can say, and I'm the Lord's agent, and I became his agent. And I said, then I knew I didn't have to have self-confidence. I had to have Christ confidence. And I became very bold, but in a quiet way. Not a loudmouth. I just sit in their house and tell them, hey, you can pay your tithing. In the name of Jesus Christ, you can pay your tithing. And I became bold in the name of Jesus Christ. And that's my motto for the rest of my life. When I paint a picture or anything, I can do this in the name of Jesus Christ, and I can treat people the way they ought to be treated in the name of Jesus Christ. So I became a testimony bearing, and then you can't live on that yesterday's testimonies, but that's why I like to study and read the Book of Mormon and go to church and bear my testimony in church every once in a while, but not too often, because I don't want to be one of those who do it but every once in a while I feel like I need to do it. I'm into this. People could tell. In the temple, I think you say you'd give your own life if necessary. You don't give your life by dying, you give it by living. And I've found so much joy in this church and so much direction in raising my kids and all that. It's my life. And I don't consider myself a fanatic, because I'm not. I'm just a humble old guy who knows something's true. And I think everybody wants a cause. That's why they march and that. They want a cause, and I've got a cause, and people don't have to join the churches or stay in it for me, but I'm going to stay in it. Somebody says I'm leaving the church because I got too many questions, and I say, well, I'm staying because I've got so many answers. We really have a lot of answers. And that's my testimony. First came Jesus Christ, and then found out who Joseph Smith was, and I know who the president of the church is today. And I'm trying to be a pleasant fellow and somebody who lifts people rather than drives them in the ground. There's enough driving in the ground. I want to pull them up and make them feel good about themselves and give them confidence. But that, I think, mixed in there was my testimony. And boy, I'm really big on acting in the name of Jesus Christ. And if you want to succeed, do your job in His name. That's what you're doing. And it's different. It puts a whole new light on it. People think they know everything. They don't know everything until they know what He knows. And God bless us. You make me cry. I don't cry easy because I never been gifted with the ability to create tears. But I can really feel it in my deepest recesses of my own soul. It's a wonderful way to go. He is the way. And if you try to go some other way, you're missing the great spiritual boat that takes you onto the sea of joy. And I think the joy that could come is fleeting, but someday we'll have the fullness of joy all the time, and I guess that's in the next life. So thank you. It's been a very good experience for me to be with you, to talk about things that matter, and matter a lot. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.